Okay, where I'm standing is a patch of grassland in the middle of Mount Merrion, which is a suburb that has been steadily built up and developed since the 1930s. So this has been well tramped over many decades. I'm standing between the church built in the 1950s and the school built in the 1960s. But where we're standing, before that there was just a big house with an extensive lawn, which would have been scythed a couple of times a year. And what we're standing on is the last fragment left of that lawn. And if you look more closely, you can surely see the fantastic range of colour and variety that is here. And I should stress, this isn't planted like in a flower bed. These are indigenous. This is grassland. But if you can see all the flowers, there isn't even all that much grass. It's not like a lawn with a few buttercups and daisies sticking out of it. Many of these can only be here because there is grass around them. And there is at least 9, maybe 10, maybe even 11 types of grass, species of grass growing. But what really catches the eye, and especially early in the year, is the flowers. And the one that you can hardly see at all because they're nearly finished is these ones. Those are the cowslips. Cowslips happen early in the year and by now they're setting seed. But I can step on the rosettes because grassland is so called because it can be grazed. Reindeer or cattle or anything like that, rabbits, anything, happy to graze grassland. And when they do, they get this tremendous mixture of different vitamins and things and colours. And many of them have this shape, this rosette shape that you can stand on. You're probably familiar with, say, dandelions. Now, I first noticed this particular patch. Up to then, I'd always assumed it was part of the church grounds that were lawn-mowed from time to time during the summer to keep them neat, like a park or a football pitch or something like that. Didn't really look, even though I've been a wildflower enthusiast most of my life. And then one day I was just standing down there waiting for a child to come out of school and pushing a buggy with a toddler in it. And the grass had been cut recently and my eye just spotted this pink flower and I went straight towards it and suddenly I saw it's a bee orchid. What is a bee orchid doing in the middle of Mount Merrion? In fact, I've just spotted one right now. There's one up there which I will go and take a look at. I'll be careful not to trample the other orchids. But I would add a caution that we shouldn't always only look for things that are spectacular and decorative and rare, relatively rare. They're only here because they're part of an entire system that includes many very common plants. It's an ecosystem and you won't find orchids without it. I mean, nowadays when most people, when they hear the word orchid, they're picturing some glamorous thing from the florist in a box, and even those, if you grow them, have very little root system. Well, one of the interesting things about orchids is that they don't have much of a root system. In fact, the word orchid refers to their quite small root system, like 2 little ball-shaped things. So they produce a great deal of seed, but the seed is very, very tiny. It's as small as talcum powder. So most seeds carry a bit of food to get them started on their journey of germination. I mean, think even of an apple or anything like that, even the seeds, nasturtium seeds. But orchid seed is so fine, it just lands on the ground and it's hoping to find some kind of a foothold to get it started. And the foothold that it needs to get is a fungus that grows, usually, in the soil and generally speaking on the roots of other plants. So your bee orchid is seed in the ground is looking for grass roots which have got this mycorrhizal, which is sort of food fungus, growing on them. And it uses them to get it started. So it could take several years to germinate. And when it does, of course, they're spectacular and the cycle will repeat. It also shows why it's no use trying to dig up an orchid from the wild and say, oh, that would be nice in my flower bed. We have known this to happen. Please don't do it, it's a death sentence. They are very habitat specific. And the presence of an orchid, they're also kind of sulky. They don't like being transplanted and they don't like being interfered with. So if ever you see any kind of orchid, it's an indicator that you're looking at an ecosystem with lots of other things going on as well, and that it hasn't been messed around too much. It's probably indigenous, which are both great things to know. I mean, among the plants you see here, which people just walk past thinking, oh, that's just grass, you'd see loads of fertility coming from the members of the clover family, which suck nitrogen out of the air and feed it into the soil. And they stay green in the hottest summer. And there are several kinds of clovers and bird's foot trefoil and plants like that are here. And then you even have the mosses down at ground level. If you dig right down looking for plants here, you'll find a layer of moss between the stalks and the soil. And that helps to keep the soil cool and moist. It doesn't take any interference to keep this in maximum health and fertility. All it needs is for somebody like me or neighbours like you, to recognise what it is and how beautiful it is and to cherish it in all its diversity. I'll give you another example. I've had to teach children how to play the simple games that we played as kids growing up, running around wild on exactly this bit of land. We used to pick the burrs. We used to blow our noses on the leaves of the burdock. The traditional use is a bit more earthy than that, actually. We used to pull out the little florets of the red clover and suck the ends, which we call them honeysuckers. We used to play soldiers with the plantains and knock their heads off. This kind of shows how much of both history and folklore and physical experience and recognition was present just in a generation of children who weren't doing anything more complicated than running around on a patch of local grass. But we did get to know our biosphere very well. That is one of the things that is a human birthright. People like to know their own territory. They like to recognize it and be familiar with it and be able to use it respectfully and in a sustainable way. And so let us never forget the importance of it. There's oxygen above, there's the 9 species of grass, there's the mosses, the clovers, these extravagant flowering plants, and many other things all happening simultaneously right down to the soil at a cellular level. So and it includes us humans with our culture and our folklore and our respect for it, or disrespect for it in some cases. So that's why, residents are maintaining this patch of grassland carefully and respectfully. May sometimes, even the local school, the primary school that has had children running across it for so many decades, has an outdoor classroom which allowed a patch of this very stuff to grow and got bee orchids a foot high, which is kind of an encouraging thing to do. And we know they're native, they're not installed or sprinkled from some foreign sourced packet of seeds. They are the native biosphere and you can't improve on that. Yeah, I suppose I'll say a little more about that, since many people with very good intentions are starting up wildlife gardens and they buy packets of seeds, like I said. Or sometimes they think, okay, I'll have a water garden, so I'll get Irish water plants, even to that rather than imported ones. And then they go to the opposite end of the country and they get it out of a fast river and they bring it to the other end of the country and put it in a pond where it doesn't belong. Even that may not be particularly good for the plant. Like animals and humans are mobile. There was no humans in Ireland up to the Ice Age or in prehistoric times, and they came along because humans are mobile. They move around the globe, as they always have done, and so do animals, and recolonize. But plants don't have that option. Most of them just have to sit where they are and adapt to the conditions of pretty much exactly where they are. And if they do that for a couple of thousand years, they can evolve quite specific subspecies that could be very local to a particular microclimate, and that's really why you shouldn't move them around. They don't have the option of moving out if they don't like the conditions. They adapt. And so that's why you should try to, above all, see what you actually have locally, because you could find that your local patch of grassland or a scrap of hedge, there's sometimes even bushes across the middle of an old estate that were the remains of a fence that was there before the estate was built. And even they sometimes maintain populations where you'll see some birds, some insects, small mammals like mice, and sometimes even, remarkably, traces of woodland plants around the base of them, because some of the earliest hedges to enclose fields were made by demolishing the forest and just leaving one row along the edge to serve as a fence. And that is where you'll sometimes see bluebells growing by a hedgerow in the middle of the Midlands, where there isn't a forest for miles. And other woodland plants also occupy hedgerows in Ireland, because a great deal of our woodland cover has been lost. But our hedges are remarkably rich, miniature woodlands with things like wild roses and honeysuckle growing up them, populations of insects and birds and small mammals using them to get from place to place. You know, they go along the shelter of the hedge. Never overlook an old hedge. They're always well worth a look. I'd recommend it. You'll enjoy it.